The Teddy Bear, a 4-chapter story. Chapter 1. The Discovery. The Colorado sun was relentless that July afternoon, beating down on the asphalt with the kind of intensity that made the air shimmer like water. I had been driving for 6 hours straight, my old Chevy pickup groaning under the weight of my construction equipment, when I felt that familiar vibration in the steering wheel that meant trouble. The front tire was going soft, and I knew I had maybe 10 miles before it would be completely flat. Highway 70 stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of black cutting through the vast expanse of prairie and distant mountains. I'd been working construction jobs across 3 states, chasing work wherever I could find it, living out of motels and truck stops. It was a lonely existence, but it paid the bills and kept me moving forward after everything fell apart back home. I pulled over at the next exit, a desolate stretch of road that led to a small town called Millfield. The shoulder was wide enough for my truck, and I could see a gas station about a mile down the road. As I climbed out of the cab, the heat hit me like a physical wall, and I could smell the dust and sagebrush that dominated this part of Colorado. The tire was indeed going flat, a slow leak that would leave me stranded if I didn't deal with it soon. I walked around to the back of the truck to get my tools, muttering under my breath about timing and luck. That's when I saw it, just off the shoulder, partially hidden in the tall grass. At first, I thought it was just trash, maybe a piece of clothing that had blown off a passing vehicle. But as I got closer, I realized it was a small teddy bear, faded and weathered but still intact. It was sitting upright against a fence post, as if someone had carefully placed it there. The bear was brown with a red ribbon around its neck, and despite being exposed to the elements, it had a dignity about it that made me pause. I looked around, scanning the empty highway in both directions. There were no houses nearby, no signs of recent activity, just the endless Colorado landscape and the sound of wind through the grass. The bear had obviously been there for some time. Maybe months, maybe longer. Its fur was sun-bleached and matted, but the button eyes still held that innocent expression that all teddy bears seem to have. Something about leaving it there felt wrong. Maybe it was the way it sat so perfectly upright, or maybe it was the memory of my own daughter's collection of stuffed animals, carefully arranged on her bedroom shelf. Whatever the reason, I found myself reaching down and picking up the small bear. It was lighter than I expected, and I could feel that some of the stuffing had shifted or compressed over time. The red ribbon was frayed, but still firmly tied. As I held it, I noticed something else. A small tag sewn into the seam, partially faded but still readable. "Made with love," it said in cursive script, the kind of personal touch that suggested this wasn't just any store-bought toy. I stood there for a moment, holding the bear and looking out at the vast emptiness around me. Somewhere someone was probably missing this. A child had loved this bear, had carried it everywhere, had whispered secrets to it in the dark. How it ended up on the side of Highway 70, miles from anywhere, was a mystery I'd probably never solve. The logical thing would have been to leave it where I found it, in case someone came back looking for it. But something deeper, some instinct I couldn't quite name, told me to take it with me. Maybe it was the isolation talking, or maybe it was the way the bear seemed to be waiting for someone to find it. Either way, I carried it back to my truck and set it on the dashboard, where it could look out at the road ahead. As I changed the tire, I found myself glancing up at the bear occasionally. It gave the cab of my truck a different feeling, less empty somehow. I'd been driving alone for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have any kind of companion, even a silent one made of fabric and stuffing. The tire change took about 20 minutes, and by the time I was finished, the bear had settled into its new position on the dashboard like it belonged there. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and took a long drink from my water bottle, considering my next move. The nearest town was still a few miles away, and I had a job waiting for me in Grand Junction the next morning. As I climbed back into the truck, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, older than my 42 years, with lines around my eyes that hadn't been there a few years ago. The divorce had taken its toll, and the custody battle that followed had left me emotionally drained. Sarah had moved to California with Emma, our 8-year-old daughter, and I saw her maybe 4 times a year now. The bear on my dashboard reminded me of Emma's favorite stuffed elephant, the one she'd had since she was a baby. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, the bear maintaining its vigil from the dashboard. As the miles passed, I found myself talking to it occasionally, commenting on the scenery or complaining about other drivers. It was silly, but it made the long stretches of empty road feel less oppressive. That night, I stopped at a truck stop outside of Grand Junction. The parking lot was full of semis and RVs, their drivers either sleeping in their cabs or gathered around tables in the all-night diner. I grabbed a shower and a hot meal, then returned to my truck to get some sleep before the early morning start. The bear was still there on the dashboard, silhouetted against the neon lights of the truck stop. I found myself wondering again about its story, about the child who had loved it, and the circumstances that led to it being abandoned on a lonely stretch of highway. These were questions that would probably never be answered, but they occupied my thoughts as I drifted off to sleep. The next morning brought a new job, a commercial construction project that would keep me busy for the next few weeks. The bear came with me to the job site, riding on the dashboard as I navigated the streets of Grand Junction. Some of the other workers noticed it and made jokes, but I didn't care. It had become a part of my routine, a small constant in a life that was otherwise unpredictable. Days turned into weeks, and the bear remained my silent companion. I found myself looking forward to getting back to the truck at the end of each day, where it would be waiting patiently on the dashboard. It was a connection to something beyond the monotony of work and the loneliness of the road. The job in Grand Junction finished ahead of schedule, and I found myself with a few days to kill before my next assignment. I decided to drive south, maybe catch some cooler weather in the mountains. The bear came with me, of course, its presence now as natural as the steering wheel or the radio. As we drove through the winding mountain roads, I found myself thinking about purpose and meaning, about the random connections that shape our lives. A teddy bear abandoned on a highway had somehow become important to me, a reminder that even in isolation we're never completely alone. It was a small thing, but sometimes small things carry the most weight. The mountains were beautiful that time of year, with aspen trees just beginning to turn gold, and the air crisp and clean. I stopped at a scenic overlook and sat on the tailgate of my truck, the bear beside me, looking out at the vista spread below. It was one of those moments when the world feels both vast and intimate, when you're aware of being part of something larger than yourself. I thought about Emma and wondered if she still slept with her stuffed elephant. I thought about Sarah and whether she ever missed our old life before everything became complicated and painful. I thought about the unknown child who had once loved this bear, and whether they thought about it sometimes, wondering where it had gone. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and pink, I made a decision. The bear would stay with me, not just as a temporary companion, but as a permanent reminder of the connections that bind us all together. It would be my co-pilot, my silent witness to whatever adventures lay ahead. I drove back down the mountain as darkness fell, the bear's silhouette barely visible against the dashboard lights. Tomorrow would bring new roads, new challenges, new possibilities. But tonight, I wasn't alone. I had a friend riding shotgun, a small brown bear with button eyes and a red ribbon, carrying secrets and stories that might never be told. The highway stretched ahead, lit by my headlights and the stars above. In the distance, I could see the lights of a small town, promising food and rest and human connection. But even if there had been nothing ahead but empty road, I would have been content. I had found something precious on that lonely stretch of highway, and it had found me. Sometimes that's all we need. To be found, to be chosen, to matter to someone, even if that someone is a stranger carrying a teddy bear across the American West. Chapter 2. The Approach. 6 months had passed since I found the bear on Highway 70. 6 months of construction jobs, lonely highways, and quiet conversations with my dashboard companion. The bear had become more than just a travel accessory. It had become a talisman, a small source of comfort in an otherwise solitary existence. I was working a job outside of Phoenix when my truck started making that grinding noise that every driver dreads. The transmission was going, and I had maybe a few 100 miles before it would need serious work. I finished the Phoenix job and started driving north, hoping to make it to a shop I knew in Flagstaff before the transmission gave out completely. The Arizona desert in March was surprisingly pleasant, with wildflowers blooming among the cacti and a gentle breeze coming through the open windows. The bear sat in its usual spot on the dashboard, watching the landscape roll by with its unchanging expression of patient contentment. I'd grown so accustomed to its presence that I barely noticed it anymore, except during those quiet moments when the road ahead seemed endless and the silence in the cab grew too heavy. I was about 50 miles south of Flagstaff when the transmission finally started slipping badly. The truck was losing power, and I could hear the grinding getting worse. I managed to nurse it to a rest area, a small pullout with a few picnic tables and a view of the surrounding mountains. It wasn't much, but it was better than being stranded on the side of the interstate. I called the shop in Flagstaff and arranged for a tow truck, which would take at least an hour to reach me. The sun was getting low, casting long shadows across the desert, and I settled in to wait. I walked around the truck, checking the tires and fluids, more out of habit than necessity. The transmission was shot, and no amount of checking was going to change that. That's when I saw him, a figure walking along the shoulder of the highway, moving slowly and deliberately. At first, I thought it might be someone whose car had broken down, but as he got closer, I realized he was on foot by choice, not necessity. He was a man in his 40s wearing jeans and a faded flannel shirt, carrying a small backpack. There was something about his posture, the way he moved, that suggested he was carrying a burden heavier than what was in his pack. He spotted my truck and seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if debating whether to approach. I raised my hand in a friendly wave, the kind of gesture that's common among travelers in remote places. He changed direction slightly and started walking toward me. As he got closer, I could see more details. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that had seen too much sun and not enough sleep. His eyes were what caught my attention most. They had that hollow look that comes from carrying grief for too long, the kind of emptiness that no amount of time seems to heal. "Truck trouble?" he asked as he approached, his voice carrying a slight accent that I couldn't quite place. "Transmission," I replied, wiping my hands on a rag. "Got a tow coming, but it'll be a while." He nodded and looked around the rest area, as if taking inventory of his surroundings. "Mind if I sit for a minute? Been walking since dawn." "Of course," I said, gesturing to one of the picnic tables. "You heading somewhere specific?" He settled onto the bench with a weary sigh. "Not really. Just walking." He paused, then added, "Started in Tucson 3 days ago. Not sure where I'm going." There was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't a recreational hike. This was the kind of walking that people do when they're trying to escape something, or maybe trying to find something they've lost. I'd seen that look before, in my own mirror during the worst days after the divorce. "I'm Jack," I said, extending my hand. "Michael," he replied, shaking it. His grip was firm but brief, as if he wasn't used to human contact anymore. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the shadows lengthen across the desert. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with an effortless grace that made our earthbound struggles seem small and temporary. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that develops between people who understand that sometimes words aren't necessary. "Beautiful country," Michael said eventually, more to fill the silence than because he felt the need to make conversation. "It is," I agreed. "Easy to get lost in it, though, both literally and figuratively." He glanced at me, and I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. "Recognition, maybe, or understanding. You sound like you speak from experience." "Maybe a little," I admitted. "Been driving these roads for a while now. Sometimes you're not sure if you're running towards something or away from something." Michael nodded slowly. "I know that feeling." I was about to ask him more about his journey when he suddenly went still, his attention fixed on something inside my truck. I followed his gaze and realized he was staring at the bear on the dashboard. His entire demeanor changed in an instant, the casual weariness replaced by something much more intense. "That bear," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you get that bear?" I looked at the dashboard, where the little brown bear sat in its usual spot, the red ribbon still tied around its neck, despite months of desert sun and highway vibration. "Found it on the side of the road," I said. "Near Denver, about 6 months ago." It was just sitting there in the grass like someone had placed it there. Michael stood up abruptly, his face having gone pale. He walked closer to the truck, his eyes never leaving the bear. Can I look at it?" "Sure," I said, reaching through the open window to retrieve it. As I handed it to him, I noticed that his hands were shaking slightly. He held the bear with infinite care, turning it over in his hands, examining every detail. The red ribbon, the button eyes, the small tag that read, "Made with Love." His breathing had become shallow, and I could see tears forming in the corners of his eyes. "This is impossible," he whispered. "This can't be real. What's wrong?" I asked, genuinely concerned now. "Do you recognize it?" He looked up at me, and the pain in his eyes was so raw that I had to look away. "This is my daughter's bear," he said, his voice breaking. "Her name was Lucy. She was wearing it the day she disappeared." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, and suddenly the desert air seemed too thin to breathe. "What do you mean disappeared?" Michael sat down heavily on the ground, still clutching the bear. 3 years ago. We were camping near Denver, up in the mountains. She was 7 years old and she never went anywhere without this bear. She called it Mr. Buttons." He paused, struggling to get the words out. "She went to get water from the stream, maybe 50 yards from our campsite. When she didn't come back, I went looking. Found her shoes by the water, but..." He shook his head. "She was gone. Just gone." I felt my own eyes welling up. "They never found her? Search teams, helicopters, dogs. They looked for weeks. The police investigated everyone, including me. But there was no trace, no sign of what happened. It's like she just vanished." He held the bear up to his face, breathing in deeply. "I can still smell her on it. After all this time, I can still smell my little girl." I sat down beside him, not knowing what to say. What do you say to a father who's lost his child? What words could possibly matter in the face of that kind of pain? "I've been looking for her ever since," Michael continued. "Lost my job, my house, my marriage. My wife said I was obsessed, that I needed to accept that Lucy was gone. But I couldn't. I can't. Every lead, every possible sighting, every tip from the police. I followed them all, and when there were no more leads, I just started walking. Thought maybe if I covered enough ground, asked enough people, showed enough photos." He trailed off, and I could see the weight of 3 years of futile searching in his slumped shoulders. "Where did you say you found this?" "Highway 70, about 30 miles east of Denver. There's a small town called Millfield nearby. The bear was sitting by a fence post, like someone had put it there deliberately. Michael's head snapped up. Millfield? That's only about 15 miles from where we were camping. We drove through there on our way to the campground. He stood up, suddenly energized. You have to show me exactly where you found it. Please. I looked at this broken man holding his daughter's teddy bear, and I knew there was no way I could refuse. My truck's not going anywhere until the tow truck comes, I said. But after that, after I get it fixed, I'll drive you there. I promise. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't tell you what this means to me. To know that she made it that far, that she might have... He couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Hope, even the faintest glimmer of it, was sometimes all that kept a person going. The tow truck arrived 20 minutes later, and Michael rode with me to the shop in Flagstaff. We didn't talk much during the ride. He spent most of the time holding the bear, staring at it as if it might reveal its secrets if he looked hard enough. I called ahead to the shop and arranged for a rush job on the transmission, willing to pay extra to get back on the road as quickly as possible. While we waited for the work to be done, Michael told me more about Lucy. She had been a bright, curious child who loved animals and wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She had been fascinated by the stars and had begged her parents to take her camping so she could see them without city lights. The bear had been a birthday gift from her grandmother, and Lucy had insisted on taking it everywhere. She used to have tea parties with it, Michael said with a sad smile. Set up her little plastic cups and saucers, and she'd pour imaginary tea for both of them. She'd tell it about her day at school, about her friends, about her dreams. He paused, his voice growing quieter. I used to think it was silly, the way she talked to it like it was real. Now I'd give anything to hear her voice again, even if she was just talking to a stuffed animal. The shop finished the transmission work by midnight, and we started driving east immediately. Michael insisted on paying for gas, though I tried to refuse. It's the least I can do, he said. You're giving me the first real lead I've had in 3 years. As we drove through the night, I found myself thinking about fate and coincidence, about the millions of small decisions that had led to this moment. If I hadn't pulled over on that exact stretch of highway, if I hadn't noticed the bear, if I hadn't decided to take it with me, none of this would be happening. Michael would still be wandering the desert, and his daughter's bear would still be sitting by that fence post, slowly deteriorating in the weather. Do you think she's still alive? Michael asked suddenly, breaking the silence. It was a question I'd been dreading, because I didn't know how to answer it honestly, without destroying what little hope he had left. I think, I said carefully, that finding this bear means something. What it means, I don't know, but it's not nothing. He nodded, seeming to accept that non-answer. I used to dream about her every night, he said. Dreams where she was calling for me, where I could almost reach her, but not quite. They stopped about 6 months ago. I thought maybe it meant she was gone, that she was finally at peace. He held up the bear. But now I'm wondering if maybe she was trying to tell me something else. We drove on through the Colorado night, 2 strangers bound together by a teddy bear, and the desperate hope that it might lead to answers. In the distance, I could see the lights of Denver beginning to glow against the eastern sky. Soon we would be retracing the path that had brought the bear to me, following breadcrumbs that might lead to the truth about what happened to a little girl named Lucy. Chapter 3. The Return. The sun was rising as we approached the familiar stretch of Highway 70, where I had found the bear 6 months earlier. The desert had given way to rolling hills and scattered trees, and in the distance, the Rocky Mountains rose like a wall against the morning sky. Michael had been quiet for the past hour, clutching the bear and staring out at the landscape, as if he might recognize something from his years of searching. It's just ahead, I said, slowing the truck. "The next exit is Millfield." Michael sat up straighter, his attention focused completely on the road ahead. "I remember driving through here," he said quietly. "We stopped for gas in town, and Lucy wanted to buy postcards to send to her friends. She was so excited about the camping trip." I took the exit and pulled over at the same spot where I had changed my tire 6 months earlier. The fence post was still there, weathered and leaning slightly, and the patch of grass where the bear had been sitting was now brown and dormant in the early spring. Michael got out of the truck before I had even come to a complete stop. He walked directly to the fence post, as if drawn by some invisible force. The bear was still in his hands, and he held it up to the exact spot where I had found it. "She was here," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and pain. "My little girl was here." I joined him by the fence, looking around at the empty landscape. In the daylight, it seemed even more desolate than I remembered. The nearest house was at least a mile away, and the road saw very little traffic. "Why would she have come here?" I asked. Michael shook his head. "I don't know. The campground was 15 miles north of here, up in the mountains. If she wandered off from the stream, she would have had to walk for hours to get here. And she was only 7 years old?" He paused, studying the terrain. "Unless someone brought her here." The implication hung in the air between us. We both knew that if someone had brought Lucy to this spot, it probably wasn't for a good reason. But finding the bear here, carefully placed by the fence post, suggested that she had been alive when she arrived. At least, that's what I hoped Michael was thinking. "We should go into town," I suggested. "Ask around, see if anyone remembers seeing her." Millfield was the kind of small town that seemed to exist in defiance of the modern world. Main Street was lined with old buildings that had seen better days, and the few people we saw walking around moved with the unhurried pace of those who had nowhere urgent to be. The population sign at the town limits claimed 847 residents, but I suspected that number was optimistic. We started at the gas station where Michael remembered stopping 3 years earlier. The attendant was a young man who couldn't have been working there when Lucy disappeared, but he directed us to Betty's Diner, which he said was where all the old-timers hang out. Betty's Diner was a classic small-town restaurant with red vinyl booths and a counter that had probably been there since the 1950s. The smell of coffee and bacon grease hung in the air, and the walls were covered with faded photographs of local high school football teams and beauty queens. A handful of customers sat at scattered tables, most of them men in their 60s and 70s who looked like they had been coming here for decades. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a kind face, approached our table with a pot of coffee. "You boys just passing through?" she asked, filling our cups without waiting for an answer. "Actually, we're looking for information about something that happened about 3 years ago," Michael said, pulling out his wallet. From it, he withdrew a photograph of Lucy, creased and worn from handling. "This is my daughter. She disappeared from a campground north of here, and we have reason to believe she might have been in the area." The waitress, whose name tag read Dolores, took the photograph and studied it carefully. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "I remember when this happened. The whole town was talking about it. Police came through, showed us all this same picture. We were all keeping our eyes open, hoping she'd turn up." "Do you remember anyone mentioning seeing her?" Michael asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Dolores shook her head. "No, but let me ask around." She walked to the counter and spoke quietly to the cook, then to an elderly man sitting alone at a corner table. Within minutes, word had spread through the small diner, and several people had gathered around our table. "I remember the search," said an older man wearing a John Deere cap. "Had helicopters flying over for days. We all thought she might have gotten lost in the mountains. Maybe fell into a ravine or something. The police searched every building in town," added a woman with white hair and thick glasses. Even went through the old abandoned places out on the county roads. Never found a trace. Michael showed them the bear, explaining how I had found it by the fence post on the highway. Several people examined it carefully, but no one recognized it specifically. However, the woman with glasses, who introduced herself as Martha, had a suggestion. "You should talk to old Pete," she said. "He lives in that trailer park on the other side of town. He's a little odd, but he notices things. Spends a lot of time walking around, picking up trash and bottles. If anyone saw something that didn't belong, it would be Pete." The trailer park was a collection of aging mobile homes, arranged in rough rows, some well-maintained and others clearly abandoned. We found Pete's trailer easily enough. It was the one with the immaculate yard and the collection of wind chimes hanging from the awning. A thin man in his 70s answered our knock, his eyes sharp and alert despite his age. "You're asking about that little girl," he said before we could even introduce ourselves. "Saw you talking to Martha at the diner. She called ahead." He gestured for us to sit on a couple of lawn chairs in his small yard. "I been thinking about that child for 3 years now." Something about it never sat right with me. Michael leaned forward eagerly. "What do you mean?" Pete was quiet for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "Day after the police came through town, I was walking my usual route along the highway. Pick up cans and bottles, you know. Good for the environment and good for a few extra dollars." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "Found something that morning that didn't belong. A child's sock, bright pink with little flowers on it. Was caught on a bush, about a quarter mile from where you found that bear." Michael's face went pale. "Did you tell the police?" "Course I did. Took it right to the sheriff's office. But they said it could have been from anybody. Could have been there for months. Didn't seem to think it was important." Pete's voice carried a note of frustration. "But I know what I saw. That sock was fresh. Hadn't been there the day before. Is there anything else?" I asked. "Anything you might have seen or heard that seemed unusual?" Pete stood up and walked to the edge of his yard, looking out toward the highway. "There was something else, but I never told nobody about it because it sounds crazy." He turned back to us. "That night, the night before I found the sock, I heard a car engine running real late. Must have been around 2 in the morning. It was idling, just sitting there for maybe 10-15 minutes. Then it drove off slow, like whoever was driving didn't want to wake nobody up." "Did you see the car?" Michael asked. "Was too dark, and I didn't think much of it at the time. People stop on the highway all the time, check their maps, take a phone call. But thinking about it later after I found that sock," Pete shrugged. "Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something." Michael thanked Pete and gave him his contact information, asking him to call if he remembered anything else. As we walked back to the truck, I could see that the old man's story had given him both hope and anguish. The possibility that Lucy had made it this far, that she might have been alive for at least a few hours after she disappeared, was both encouraging and heartbreaking. "We need to search that area," Michael said as we drove back toward the highway. "If Pete found her sock a quarter mile from where you found the bear, there might be other clues." We spent the rest of the day walking the stretch of highway between the 2 locations, searching through the grass and brush for any sign that Lucy had been there. The bear never left Michael's hands. He carried it as if it were a compass that might lead him to his daughter. We found nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no indication that a 7-year-old girl had passed this way. As the sun began to set, we sat on the tailgate of my truck, both of us exhausted and discouraged. The mountains in the distance were turning purple in the fading light, and a cool breeze had picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "I keep thinking I should feel hopeful," Michael said, holding the bear up to catch the last rays of sunlight. "For 3 years I've had nothing. No leads, no clues, no answers. And now I have this. and I know she made it this far. But instead of hope, I just feel empty. Why empty? I asked. Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring at the bear in his hands. Because I think I know what happened, he said finally. I think someone took her from the campground, brought her here, and he couldn't finish the sentence. You don't know that, I said. The bear was placed carefully by that fence post. Someone who was going to hurt her wouldn't have done that. Maybe, Michael said. Or maybe someone found her after whatever happened. Maybe they found her and the bear, and they wanted to make sure the bear would be found too. A kind of memorial. It was a possibility I had considered but hadn't wanted to voice. The careful placement of the bear, the way it had been positioned to be easily seen from the road, did suggest that someone had put it there deliberately. But whether that someone was Lucy herself or someone else, we might never know. There's something else we should try, I said. We should check with the local police, see if they have any records from that time. Maybe someone reported seeing something, but it never got connected to Lucy's case. Michael nodded. And we should check with the state police, too. If someone was driving through that night, maybe they saw something. As we drove back toward Denver, I found myself thinking about the strange journey that had brought us together. 6 months ago, I had been just another construction worker driving lonely highways, and now I was part of a search that had consumed a father's life for 3 years. The bear sat between us on the seat, a silent witness to our growing determination to find answers. Whatever happened to her? Michael said as we reached the outskirts of Denver. I need to know. Not knowing is worse than any truth could be. I understood what he meant. The uncertainty was a kind of torture, keeping hope alive just enough to prevent acceptance and healing. Whether Lucy was alive or dead, whether she had been taken by someone or had simply wandered off and gotten lost, Michael deserved to know the truth. And somehow, I had become committed to helping him find it. The lights of Denver sprawled ahead of us, a million people living their lives, carrying their own burdens and hopes. Somewhere in that vast city, or in the mountains beyond, the answers we sought might be waiting. The bear had brought us this far. Now we had to find the courage to follow, wherever it might lead us next. Chapter 4. The Truth Revealed. The Denver Police Department's Missing Persons Division was located in a gray concrete building that seemed designed to discourage hope. Detective Sarah Chen, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a patient manner, had been the lead investigator on Lucy's case. She remembered Michael immediately, and the weariness in her expression suggested she had dealt with many desperate parents over the years. "Mr. Harrison," she said, gesturing for us to sit in her small office. "I have to tell you, we've followed every lead in your daughter's case. The file is still open, but we haven't had any new information in over a year." Michael placed the bear on her desk. "This is new information." Detective Chen picked up the bear, examining it carefully. "Where did you find this?" I explained how I had discovered it on Highway 70, and Michael described our visit to Millfield and our conversation with Pete. The detective listened intently, making notes in a file that was already thick with reports and photographs. "Pete Johnson," she said when I mentioned the old man's name. He called us several times during the initial investigation. "Found that sock you mentioned, and a few other items that turned out to be unrelated. We investigated every lead he provided, but nothing panned out." "What about the car he heard that night?" Michael asked. "Did you follow up on that?" Detective Chen nodded. "We canvassed the area, asked residents if they saw any unfamiliar vehicles. Got a few reports, but nothing concrete. The problem is, Highway 70 is a major route. Hundreds of cars pass through there every day." She opened Lucy's file and pulled out a photograph. "This is what your daughter was wearing the day she disappeared," she said, handing it to Michael. "Do you recognize the clothing?" The photo showed Lucy in a pink t-shirt, blue jeans, and white sneakers. She was holding the bear, which was clearly visible in the image. Michael stared at the photo for a long moment, then looked at the bear on the detective's desk. "The sock Pete found," I said suddenly. "Was it pink with flowers?" Detective Chen flipped through the file. "Yes. We still have it in evidence." She pulled out a plastic bag containing a small pink sock with a floral pattern. "We tested it for DNA, but it was too degraded by weather exposure to get a clear result." Michael's hands were shaking as he reached for the evidence bag. "That's Lucy's sock. I remember buying them for her. She picked them out herself at Target because she loved the flower pattern." "Even if it is hers," Detective Chen said gently, "it doesn't tell us what happened to her. We know she made it to that area, but we don't know how or why." I had been thinking about this puzzle for hours, and suddenly the pieces began to form a picture. "What if she wasn't taken from the campground?" I said. "What if she left on her own?" Both Michael and Detective Chen looked at me with surprise. "Think about it," I continued. "Lucy was 7 years old, scared, maybe disoriented. She goes to the stream, maybe sees something or someone that frightens her. Instead of running back to the campsite, she runs the other way, gets lost, wanders for hours in the dark." "But how would she have gotten to the highway?" Michael asked. "That's 15 miles through rough terrain. Not if she followed the stream," I said. "Streams eventually lead to rivers, and rivers lead to roads. A scared child might think that following the water would lead her to safety." Detective Chen was nodding slowly. "It's possible. The search teams focused on a 5-mile radius around the campground, but if she kept moving—" She pulled out a topographical map and spread it on her desk. "If she followed Miller Creek downstream, it would eventually bring her to the valley floor, and from there, she could have reached the highway," Michael finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "But that still doesn't explain what happened to her after she got there," Detective Chen said. "A 7-year-old girl walking alone on a highway at night. Someone would have seen her, helped her, or hurt her, I thought. But I didn't say it aloud. There's something else we need to check," I said. "Hospital records, emergency room visits from that night. If Lucy was injured, dehydrated, or in shock, someone might have brought her to a hospital." Detective Chen made a note. "We did check the local hospitals during the initial investigation, but we can expand the search, cover a wider area, include smaller clinics." "What about foster care records?" Michael asked. "If someone found her and she couldn't remember who she was, couldn't tell them her name, we checked that too," the detective said. "But we can look again, especially at placements that happened around that time." As we left the police station, Michael was quiet, lost in thought. The bear was back in his hands, and he held it as if it were a lifeline. "I keep thinking about her walking alone in the dark," he said finally. "She was so small, so scared. I should have been watching her more carefully." "You can't blame yourself," I said. "You were 30 feet away. Any parent would have done the same thing." We spent the next 3 days visiting hospitals, clinics, and social services offices throughout the Denver area. The bear came with us everywhere, and Michael showed Lucy's photo to every nurse, doctor, and social worker we met. Most people were sympathetic but couldn't help. A few thought they might remember something, but the memories were too vague to be useful. On the 4th day, we expanded our search to include smaller towns within a 100-mile radius of where I had found the bear. It was a long shot, but we were running out of options. The 3rd town we visited was called Cedar Springs, population 2,300, nestled in a valley about 40 miles east of Denver. The Cedar Springs Community Hospital was a small facility that served the surrounding rural area. The emergency room was staffed by a single doctor and 2 nurses, and the waiting room looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. We spoke with the charge nurse, a woman named Linda, who had been working there for 15 years. "I remember that time period," she said, looking at Lucy's photo. "There was a lot of activity because of the missing child case. Police came through, showed us pictures, asked if we'd seen anything unusual." "Did you?" Michael asked. Linda was quiet for a moment, studying the photo more carefully. "There was something," she said slowly. "A man brought in a little girl that night, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. Said he found her walking along the highway, dehydrated and confused. She couldn't tell us her name, didn't seem to remember where she came from." Michael gripped the bear so tightly that his knuckles turned white. What happened to her? The doctor treated her for dehydration and exposure. She was scared, wouldn't let anyone touch her, except for this one volunteer, an older woman named Ruth Martinez. Ruth had a way with children, very gentle and patient. Linda paused, then continued. "The little girl kept asking for her bear, said someone had taken it from her. We thought she was confused, maybe traumatized. Where is she now?" I asked. "Ruth took her home that night. She was a registered foster parent, and with the child being so upset, it seemed like the best option. The plan was to keep her until we could figure out who she was, but..." Linda shrugged. "Ruth moved away about a year later. Took the girl with her." "Where did they go?" Michael asked urgently. "I'm not sure. Ruth's daughter lives in Colorado Springs, I think. She might know." We got Ruth Martinez's daughter's contact information and drove to Colorado Springs immediately. Maria Santos was a teacher in her 40s who remembered her mother's foster children well. She met us at a coffee shop near her school, and when Michael showed her Lucy's photo, her reaction was immediate. "Oh my God," she said, covering her mouth with her hands. "That's Emma. That's the little girl Mom fostered. Emma," Michael said. "That's what she called herself. Said her name was Emma, though she couldn't remember her last name or where she came from. She was so traumatized, so scared. Mom worked with her for months, trying to help her remember, but the memories just weren't there." "Where are they now?" I asked. Maria's expression grew sad. "Mom passed away last year. Cancer. Emma was devastated. She loved Mom so much. Called her Grandma Ruth. After the funeral, she went to live with Mom's sister in California." Michael was struggling to process this information. "She's alive," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Lucy is alive. Her name is Emma now," Maria said gently. "She's been Emma for 3 years. She doesn't remember being Lucy, doesn't remember you, or her mother. The trauma, the doctor said it sometimes causes that kind of memory loss in children." "I need to see her," Michael said. "I need to talk to her." Maria looked uncomfortable. "I'll give you my aunt's contact information, but you need to understand. Emma is happy now. She's doing well in school, has friends. If you're really her father, you have every right to see her, but..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You need to think about what's best for her, not just what you want." We drove back to Denver in silence, both of us trying to process what we had learned. Lucy was alive, living in California under a different name, with no memory of her previous life. It was the best possible outcome, but it also raised questions that had no easy answers. "What am I supposed to do?" Michael asked as we sat in the parking lot of my hotel. "She's my daughter, but she doesn't remember me. She's been through so much trauma, and now I'm supposed to walk back into her life and disrupt everything again?" "You're supposed to do what's best for her," I said, "which might mean taking this slow, working with professionals, making sure she's ready." Michael held up the bear. "At least I can give this back to her. Even if she doesn't remember me, maybe she'll remember Mr. Buttons." The next morning, Michael called Ruth Martinez's sister in California. The conversation was difficult, emotional, and lasted over an hour. When it was over, Michael looked both relieved and terrified. "She's agreed to let me visit," he said. "But with conditions. I have to work with a therapist who specializes in childhood trauma. Emma, Lucy, has to be prepared gradually. And if at any point the therapist thinks it's harmful to her, I have to back off." "That sounds reasonable," I said. "She also said Emma has been having nightmares lately. Dreams about a bear, about someone calling her name. The therapist thinks her memories might be starting to come back on their own." 3 weeks later, I drove Michael to the airport. He was carrying a small suitcase and Lucy's bear, now carefully cleaned and with a new red ribbon. The reunion would happen slowly, carefully, with Emma's well-being as the top priority. There were no guarantees about how it would go, but for the first time in 3 years, Michael had hope. "I don't know how to thank you," he said as we stood at the security checkpoint. "If you hadn't found that bear, hadn't kept it with you, hadn't taken me back to where you found it, you don't need to thank me," I said. "I'm just glad I could help." He hugged me then. This man who had become a friend through shared purpose and determination. "I'll call you," he said. "Let you know how it goes." As I drove back to Denver, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us together. A teddy bear abandoned on a highway had led to the reunion of a father and daughter, had solved a mystery that had consumed a man's life for 3 years. It was a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness, stopping to pick up a discarded toy, listening to a stranger's story, caring enough to help, can have profound consequences. 6 months later, Michael called with an update. Emma was slowly remembering her life as Lucy, with the help of therapy and the patient love of a father who had never stopped looking for her. The memories were coming back in fragments: a camping trip, a stream, a long walk in the dark. She remembered the bear, remembered losing it when she was scared and confused. Getting it back had been like finding a piece of herself that had been missing. "She wants to meet you," Michael said. "The man who found Mr. Buttons and brought him back to her. She says you're her hero." I told him I'd be honored to meet her, this brave little girl who had survived so much and found her way back to the people who loved her. The bear had been our connection, our guide through the darkness, and now it was back where it belonged, in the arms of a child who had never really lost her way, just temporarily forgotten the path home. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with the smallest steps, and sometimes the most precious things are found in the most unexpected places. A teddy bear on a highway, a chance meeting at a rest stop, a father's unending love. These are the threads that weave the tapestry of human connection, reminding us that we are never truly alone as long as we remain open to the possibility of hope. The story ends not with dramatic conclusions, but with quiet healing, with the understanding that some wounds take time to heal and some memories need patience to return. But love, real love, endures through everything, through darkness and confusion, through years of separation and pain, through the long journey back to each other. And sometimes, just sometimes, a small brown bear with button eyes and a red ribbon can lead us home.